Welcome to Reinventors in the Reinvent America series, where today we're going to be reinventing technology and politics. And what we mean by that is essentially we're going to be looking at the important technological developments that have occurred or are occurring now in this 2014 political cycle. We're also going to look ahead to what we can expect in the one that's going to be starting up here, the next one, the 2016 cycle, soon to start. Now, this is an issue, a topic that's dear to the heart of our partners in this series, the Reinvent America series, which is Tech for America, or T4A.org. This is a group of technologists, entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and Seattle, who essentially had their roots in their support of the tech community of Obama in the 2012 election. But after that, they formed a nonpartisan C3 that essentially is trying to promote a technological upgrade of America in both the private and the public sectors. And so this is something that they've been partnering on this series, and this is so right up their alley. Now, the idea behind this conversation today is that ever since the election of 2004, 10 long years ago, we have essentially seen a very disruptive technology kind of emerge in every cycle that essentially gives some strategic advantage to a group, a candidate, a party, that then becomes, essentially lifts the playing field for everybody and becomes the standard from that point on. In 2004, it was Howard Dean's campaign, and essentially the mastermind of that, the campaign manager, Joe Trippi, is here with us today. It's fantastic. We're privileged and honored to have him here. But basically every election since then, there's been these big upgrades. We know that in 2008, we had the big Obama election that moved the ball there. We saw the 2012, the big data applied into the presidential as well, in the Obama campaign. These are just examples, but every single election we essentially have had this phenomenon. So what we're doing here in this conversation is looking at what is happening this cycle that essentially is going to raise the bar like that, and also what might be happening in the next cycle. And to help us do this, we've got our anchor for today is Ben Rattray. Ben is the perfect person to be doing this. Ben is essentially the founder and CEO of Change.org. Change.org is like the fastest growing platform for social change out there. It's 75 million folks now using it. They're tracking towards about 100 million. They're all over the world right now. And the thing about Ben is he's been tracking the general phenom outside of Change.org since it was founded in early 2007, if I remember right. So he's been tracking this as well. He's going to help lead the conversation. But it's not just Ben here. The beauty of Reinventors is we get this diverse background of all kinds of folks. I mentioned we got Joe Trippi here, among others. And so what we're going to do is go around the table here and just have everyone introduce themselves a little bit of what they, who they are and what they bring to the table. And so actually, Joe, why don't we start with you? And just give us a little background, and we'll go around the whole table here. Oops, you're muted up there. Yeah.
There it is. Yeah. The first thing I'd say is that I'm the old fogey here. Back in 2004, it was, look, it was. I keep telling people we were just the Wright brothers. Everybody else that's here with us today, the Reinventors, folks that are building the Apollo project and beyond that. We were very primitive in building what we were building. But proud that we helped launch a lot of the things that Change.org and others have just, blown me away with what they've been able to do. So happy to be here today.
Fantastic. Happy to have you here. Jim, do you want to chime in with your background?
Whoops. Hey, yes, so my name's Jim Greer. I think I just showed you a picture of my kid there for a second. So my background is a video game developer, and I started a platform with my sister actually about 8 years ago called Congregate, which is like YouTube for games. And so now, I've transitioning out of that somewhat and have started CounterPAC, which is a super PAC, as it sounds like, that is attempting to bring greater transparency and greater fairness to sort of the world of campaigns, and specifically focusing on money in politics. And the way we're doing that is basically putting pressure on candidates, raising accountability for candidates to take pledges where they hold themselves to a higher standard of behavior. So right now in this cycle, we are in the Alaska Senate race, we're in West Virginia House race, and we're in some other races. We in Colorado's 6th House race, and basically we've targeted these districts where there's very competitive campaigns, and we're very hopeful that we're going to, in this last month of the election, be able to get them to behave in a way that is higher than the law, the sort of dismal state of what's required right now.
Fantastic. Good to have you here. Anne, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Anne Ravel. I'm presently the Vice Chair of the Federal Election Commission, and I came about less than a year ago from the California Fair Political Practices Commission, where I was the chair. I care most about having greater involvement in politics, the political system, and government, and it became very clear to me from what I've seen both in California and at the FEC that technology has the ability to make huge strides in civic engagement issues. In fact, we've had a number of matters that came before us with very little information about how they really impact these things, but I'm interested in this subject. I'm going to be chair next year. I want to emphasize it. I want to get more information. I want to make sure that we don't do anything to impede innovation, but also that we get transparency, which is really important to me.
Great to have you here.
Thank you.
Josh, you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Josh Ginsberg. My background is very much in the political world. I served on 3 presidential campaigns, including 2008. I was Mitt Romney's national field director, so did a lot of organizing there, and then have run campaigns throughout the country, ranging from ballot initiatives to gubernatorial races, and also served as Governor Schwarzenegger's political director. What I'm currently doing is I co-founded a company, and serve as CEO at Zignal Labs, which one thing that I saw, and I think a lot of us saw all along the way, was there was no way for us to hear and see all the information that is being said about us out there, and then more importantly, take action on that. So what our technology does is we're a real-time media monitoring and big data analytics company that takes in every single mention online. So everything from tweets to public Facebook posts to news stories and traditional media, blogs, social videos, etc., and then show you what is important, what should you be concentrating on, and then most importantly, what action should you take. So this is a really exciting panel for me to participate in. Thank you.
Great to have you here. Nancy. Oops, you just got unmute, sorry.
How's that?
Got you.
Excellent, thank you. My name is Nancy Scola. I'm a reporter at the Washington Post, covering the intersection of technology and politics. And I tend to look at sort of the political side of tech and the tech side of politics, if that makes any sense, trying to see what lessons are available in each of those fields. And the thing I love to do is sort of dig into what people are doing out in the field, seeing what works, why and how, and sort of what might work. That's sort of it.
Fantastic, great to have you here. In from the newsroom, it looks like there. The new Bezos newsroom in the Post. Is that right?
It's a lot like the old room.
Yeah, exactly. Great, Greg, you want to do a quick intro?
Sure, thanks, Peter, and thanks for having me. Good morning, everybody. My name is Gregory Miller. I'm the co-founder and the Chief Development Officer of the Open Source Election Technology Foundation. So our flagship effort over there is something called the TrustTheVote project. It's a multi-year endeavor by a group of Silicon Valley technologists to reinvent how America votes in a digital age. I mean, we're literally developing from the ground up an entirely new, modular, and open source election technology framework. And when I say open source, I mean the software technology will be open and transparently developed, freely available without proprietary restrictions, any licensing or royalty costs. It's based on commodity off-the-shelf hardware for any jurisdiction to adopt, adapt, and deploy. Our mission simply is to make elections more verifiable, accurate, secure, and transparent. And the goal here is to increase confidence in elections and their outcomes. And our strategy is simply the delivery of production-ready systems based on elections officials' input. So today, my view of the roundtable topic is from the vantage point of elections administration, the processes of voting, and the enormous amounts of new open data that's coming available for use in politics and political campaigns. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. You give a good perspective on it. Chris, round it out.
Thanks a lot, Pete. Great to be here. I'm Chris Kelly. I served as the Chief Privacy Officer and General Counsel of Facebook, left that to run for Attorney General of California in 2010, and I did not win. So I get to spend a lot of time investing and advising companies. I'm involved in Greg's TrustTheVote project. I am the CEO of Organizer, which is a field company, as well as involved in a number of other projects. And I've got to offer an apology to everyone in advance. One of my other projects, the Sacramento Kings, I joined the ownership group a little while ago, and we're heading off to play games in Shanghai and Beijing. So I'm going to have to cut off about noon today, but definitely wanted to be part of this. I'm also part of the investment group behind Reinventors. Very, very excited about the projects that we've been able to put together so far, and this will be another great discussion today.
Absolutely. Awesome to have you here. Hey, and it's great as this group is, and we're going to jump right into it. I will say, people watching, we do welcome your questions. If you're on the G+ environment particularly, there's a nice app there. You can add your questions, comments. You can also rate what you think is the best thing going on there. If you're in seeing it streamed in other areas too, you can always, through the hashtag Reinventors and Twitter, we have people monitoring all that. Also on our site, you can actually add comments there. We'll keep an eye on it, and we might cycle some of it in, and we certainly will package it in our final package, the insights from the broader group as well. So anyhow, let's go back to Ben. Why don't you set the table here, and let's jump into the conversation.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Extremely excited about the outstanding group we have here. And so, stepping back, our perspective at Change.org is maybe what seems to be a unique one given our position, which is that technology has largely unrealized, not fully realized the potential of technology to improve democracy. So we've had a radical transformation in campaigns, right? Especially in 2012 around optimization, around analytics, big data. They've been incredibly effective at targeting and at persuasion. But the biggest problem we have in our democracy isn't that we haven't had very good ad targeting. We have many more fundamental problems than that. And the same fundamental problem we've had for decades, we think, is the incredible influence of money in politics. This has not been changed dramatically yet by technology, and it has huge downstream impacts. We know a lot of these, it impacts who runs for office, it impacts who wins, and how they govern. And then because of that, it also substantially impacts people's participation within campaigns, and most importantly, we think, between campaigns and legislative sessions. That is when policy is unfolded to really change people's lives. Now, there have been some things that have been changed because of technology with respect to this. So you see, the biggest thing is around donations. Clearly, massive small number of donations. It's also the case that in 2012, for Obama in particular, using peer-to-peer communications and local organizing has certainly increased to some extent participation rates. But fundamentally, if you look across the board, we still have the problem of low voting, huge amounts of influence in politics with money, and ultimately not the kind of transformation we want. So the question that we have is, in the technology that we're going to see that comes in campaigns over the next couple of election cycles, is it not just going to be effective to enable people to win campaigns, but actually to change the nature of our democracy? And I think there are three areas in which it has the potential to have both an impact on campaigns and on the way in which we actually govern and in civic participation. So one is money, the second is mobilization, and the third is legislation. I'll very briefly outline that, and then hopefully we dive in. On the money side, I think there are two ways in which you can undermine the influence of money in politics. One is dramatically increase the number of small donors. We've seen this already happen, but it hasn't happened at the local level nearly as much as it happened at the national level. And I think you will end up seeing a huge increase in participation rates with new technologies around donations in a distributed way, which can disrupt things. The second, though, is how do you make money less relevant? If you give elected officials or candidates a capacity to disintermediate money, not by ads, but directly connect at scale through influencers, a huge percentage of constituents, elected officials don't care about money per se, only insofar as that enables them to mobilize votes. And I think there will be ways to do so outside of money. On the mobilization front, I think that the biggest transformations here are mobile and on social. On the mobile side, Chris Kelly has sort of helped show this. In large part, it's going to, I think, be explosive over the next couple of election cycles and mass mobilization using this transformative device where every single person on the day of the election will have it on their person and in the voting booth as well. That is massively transformative, and it will be social. One of the most impactful ways in which to influence people's votes is to influence through friends. If people know that their friends know that they're going to vote or not, it has material impact on their propensity to vote. So I think on voting it will substantially impact also the experience of voting, which I think we'll hear about more today. And the final piece is often the most overlooked because it's less sexy, which is legislation. And ultimately, the most important reason for why we care about elections is because it ends up creating a group of people who legislate and impact our lives in substantial ways, and it's still the case that many people don't participate in that process. And there are going to be things, especially that we will build as well at Change.org, to enable people not just to participate between elections, but to make the connection from elections and to legislation and back to elections. Because as we know, elected officials, they care about people's opinions between elections insofar as it has impact on elections. And so those three things, I think, the money, the mobilization, and legislation have huge potential transformation. And I'm excited to hear about what people think. I know it's a bit controversial to say that we haven't made nearly as much progress as we'd like, because most of it has been about elections and winning, less about legislation and changing governance. But I'm excited to hear what people have to think.
Love that how you teed it up, Ben, the three pieces. Well, let's just go to the tables. I mean, actually, why don't we start with Joe? Why don't you jump in, and then we'll kind of start going around the table. What do you think of those three frames, or what are you seeing in this election cycle that's evidence of those things actually making the traction that Ben teed up?
No, I'm with Ben completely. There's a big disappointment in terms of the ability of technology and what a lot of people have been working on to actually change the democracy or improve it. It's been a disaster. In fact, it's actually worked the other way. Part of that is, in my view, part of it is because I think one of the things that you've got to do is make both parties obsolete at some level. Both parties are geared up to take this technology. Anything we create, they're going to try to take and use it to their advantage. And so all you do is create two parties with better tools that we created for them to manipulate people to do what they want. And I'm saying this as a Democrat, card-carrying, progressive, but I think that's part of the problem. And if you look at that, what happens is the Dean campaign, we start to, something like 650,000 people gave us, we raised about $59 million. 4 years later, a bunch of advancements. The Obama people take that, and a lot of the Dean people that have worked with Obama, and they get $500 million from 3 million people. And the other party says, well, it doesn't say let's go build a network at that point, to compete with that. They say, how do we change the rules, or how do we fight for different rules that let big money come in and fund us? And then the Democrats, Obama, doesn't say, hey, we're building a party built of people. If they're going to do super PACs, having pledged that he would never do them before 2012, he says, hey, what's wrong with super PACs? And so you have these two parties out. There's other forces that are trying to take everything we build and that's a great tool. How do we use that to manipulate people? And that's what you're seeing in the data, all the things that Ben talked about. I think the biggest problem is not who's out there trying to build a better way, but what the established power bases in both parties do with that, and how that quickly they're able to sort of pull in those tools as almost elements of the party. You look at the everything as simple as the blogosphere on the left, and it's might as well be one of the Democratic committees. Sorry, but that's how I feel about it.
That's totally interesting, actually. Nancy, did you want to kind of give your kind of overview too, quick, just what you're seeing out there, and how that fits into this frame that both Ben and Joe kind of framed out there?
I think a cynicism about what's been accomplished thus far is something you hear again and again in terms of I remember well the sort of Dean campaign days when the internet was going to change how politics worked for the better. People were going to be more involved in the democratic process. We were going to have better outcomes, and I think you don't have to be overly cynical to think that hasn't happened. One of the things that I'm hearing this campaign cycle is that, okay, federal politics is federal politics. It's always going to be money-driven, party-driven. What's really happening in an interesting way is on the local level. So you're having some of the tools that, say, the Obama campaign pioneered in terms of everything from targeting online ads using cookies to turning people out to vote using analytics. That's something both parties are trying to figure out and doing fairly well at to some degree, but when it's really powerful is when local candidates and local organizations figure out how to do that. So I'd love to I'm sort of turning this around for my own purposes because it's a little bit harder to report on that stuff if it's not happening by well-funded with well-funded PR folks behind it. But so I'd love to hear a little bit of folks think that's actually seems to be happening on the ground.
Well, I'll jump in.
Go ahead, Chris, and then Josh.
We've seen it at Organizer. I mean, we've knocked more than 2 million doors using our software so far, and it is a lot of grassroots organizations. It's also a lot of unions. We do exclusively work with progressive campaigns, but we're seeing everything from city council races to large fights in Senate races statewide. As the different committees focus on control of the Senate, but 2 million doors and adding 300,000 a week right now is a strong indication that people are deeply interested in connecting with others in face-to-face doing politics. We're really encouraged by what we're seeing so far this cycle.
Josh, jump in.
Yeah, I mean, and I think what Ben said to a large degree is accurate. One thing that we're seeing with Zignal Labs technology, and our technology is currently being used in campaigns in more than 30 states, so we're bringing in massive amounts of data. One thing that is really interesting in terms of down to the individual level is there is a much louder microphone and the ability for the individual to really drive the conversation more than ever before. I mean, one example comes to mind with the Texas governor's race, where there was a full week where the story was actually being driven not by the Houston Chronicle or the Dallas Morning News, but a random blogger in Austin who wasn't particularly influential. And you could see when you did this network node analysis and really drilled down that this person didn't have a ton of followers, didn't have a ton of people reading his blog, but you could just see the people who did follow him and retweet him or read his blog and reposted him just happened to be the right people. And that's how this story was catching on fire. So I think to a large degree, Ben's correct with his assessment, but through technology and through the evolving channels that people have to really express their opinions or break stories, it does allow for individuals, and even individuals who aren't quote-unquote as influential as maybe before, for them to have a voice within these debates and within these campaigns.
Jim, why don't you, because Ben also tied up the money piece, so just give us a piece, and actually, Joe also kind of bemoaned that a little bit. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing in that space. You're immersed in that, and I know the Mayday thing too. Your own involvement. Oops. Jim, you there? Oh.
Hey, I'm sorry. I had a little technical problem there. Sorry, what was the question? Yes. Oh,
just on the money side. Basically, you're in that money space. That's one of the three we teed up here, and one of the ones that.
Yeah. No. So I think everyone accurately focuses on it. I think this is one where obviously change is needed. Things have been moving in the wrong direction for years. It feels like one of those areas where it's really hard, and I know we have Ann here for the Federal Election Commission and the IRS to do their job when their job is to regulate their bosses, basically, the members of Congress, and so I think the way that I see technology making an impact here, or the sort of model of change that we have, is less about it is about technology. It's also just about the technology industry. So I'm on the board of Mayday PAC, which obviously is Larry Lessig's very high-profile effort to mobilize money from mostly from people in the tech industry, as well as from the sort of that tech-enabled small dollar crowdsourced donations. He's going in a very direct way and trying to elect pro-reform candidates and make reform an issue. CounterPAC, which is what I started, is doing something quite different. We're actually intervening in races, trying to change the behavior of the candidates in that race. So rather than sort of trying to create new legislation, we're saying, there's all these, bad guy super PACs out there, or, at least self-interested ones. What if you had, a private group that's aggressive, that, responds quickly to change, that has many attributes of a tech company, but is sort of is very much on the sort of good guy side. And by that I mean, we're not actually trying to influence the outcome of races, we're trying to influence the way that they're run. So we're having candidates take pledges that are modeled after the 2012 People's Pledge between Elizabeth Warren and Scott Brown in Massachusetts that was incredibly effective in getting the super PACs out of that race, making it a much less negative race, and giving much more power to small donors. So we're actually focused on transparency this year and doing pledges between House and Senate candidates, and we haven't had signed one yet, but we're very close in Alaska Senate. We're very close in West Virginia House race, the 3rd district, and so we're very hopeful that can be a model going forward. And so it's really, in that case, I think, it's the tech industry bringing its muscle, but also its sort of best practices and sort of the rate of change that it brings into a new sector. And so, it's ambitious, but I think it's kind of at the core of a lot of what we're talking here. I'll say one more thing, which is that Nancy's point about state and local elections changing faster, I think, is also very true in money in politics. And I'm also on the board of a third organization called Represent Us. And Represent Us is focused very much on getting ballot initiatives at a state and local level that sort of reduce corruption and create voucher systems or other ways for small dollar donations to have more of an impact and kind of outweigh the big money. So I think it's not necessarily that there's going to be some magic mobile device or something that's really going to transform this, but I think sort of the people, the processes, and the power of the tech industry can say a lot. It's one industry that unlike energy, entertainment, oil, and autos, etc., grew to power without having a big vested interest in the way politics work right now. And I think that it's also full of people making money at a middle age in my case, but who are not ready to just give money to the opera, but actually want to have an impact more broadly. So I'm very hopeful there.
I love that perspective. Anne, you wanted to jump in here.
I did. I actually agree with the three things that Ben spoke about the money, but I think that the money and the mobilization issues are intertwined in some ways, because it seems to me that there are a lot of ways to get people interested in politics. And one of the problems we have, and clearly because of the prevalence of big donors, a lot of people have sort of opted out of getting involved in politics and don't care. And so what we have to figure out is ways, and tech is perfect for this, I think, is ways to give people more information. And I know that some of there's an organization that came before us. It's some kind of along the CounterPAC ideas, but it relates to, it's called CrowdPAC, and they give information about candidates and try to solicit small contributions. And I think when people get invested in something, and there was a Pew Center poll done a couple of years ago after the, I think it was the Haiti earthquake, and it was related to people who were giving text message contributions. And people who saw an ad at Starbucks or whatever and then gave $10 later became so invested in the issues and got their family to be interested, and more people contributed. And as we know, there was a whole movement of people who were giving money, but not only were they giving money, but they were staying invested in the issue and what was going on. And so I kind of see these things as connected. I mean, clearly, I think money in politics it's a good effort to try to figure out other ways around the prevalence of money. Of course, that's the job of the FEC, so I'd be out of a job, but I'd be happily out of a job if there wasn't money in politics. But it seems like that's going to be a long time coming. But I think there are a lot of things that can be done in the interim to make a huge difference.
Actually, why don't we jump to Chris? You had a follow on Ann's thing. Greg, we're going to get you in a minute here, but and then
I mean, I wanted to jump in. You know, we talk a lot about money in politics, and what I think, you know, Ann's taken a great realistic perspective that it's not heading out of politics anytime soon. What we can promote quite aggressively, I think, is a lot more transparency about money in politics and turning it into a discussion. But Ann raised, I think, an excellent point that the money issue in many ways is a proxy for engagement. Money flows right now largely to television ads still, which is kind of a strange use of a lot of it when people are spending less time with television all the time. But that seems to be what drives a lot of this. It can be invested in much more effectively in person-to-person in targeted communications and online ads and things like that to drive engagement. A lot of it is also spent on driving down engagement of others, the negative ads trying to discourage people from voting. And I also want to throw out a somewhat controversial idea that sometimes all the talk that we often use about money in politics gives people an excuse to check out. It says to them that it's a corrupt environment that they don't want to be any part of, when what we need to be doing is figuring out how to bring people back in and how to encourage them and show them their power. We try to do that at Organizer with mobile technology. We think that there are a lot of different ways to do that, but a lot of those things relatively inexpensively, and so you can diminish the importance of money in politics by upping the quantity of people power in politics.
So yeah, this is Greg. I'd like to sort of build off of Chris's point there. I mean, from our perspective over in the elections technology space, we're always interested in all the energy around engagement and getting voters to the polls. We're doing a lot, of course, in the whole online voter registration and management services area. But I think the thing that I'm curious about and looking forward to listening here is our great concern is this: you spend all this money and time and energy on getting people to the polls, only to go to a polling experience that is so terrible that nobody wants to go back.
And so, but to just add to that, you're thinking if we basically built a much more seamless, technologically enhanced, up-to-date way of voting, essentially, it would actually impact the outcome ongoing, is what you're trying to say.
I think, Peter, I think it's simpler than that. I think that the Presidential Commission Elections Administration talked a lot about those long lines, and there's lots of things that we can do to improve the polling place experience. It doesn't have to be a fancy new fourth-generation touchscreen for ballot marking. It can be as simple as tools to help people know when is the best time to try to get to the polling place and how long is that line and what's its travel rate, and et cetera. The simplicity with which I can register and know that I'm at the right place to go through the process. Things that can actually just improve that experience. So everyone's all jacked up and being engaged to get there, and when they get there they discover that it turns out that it actually is as easy to board a plane as it is to cast a ballot. Yeah, there's certainly a lot that can be done to just improve the veracity of the technology when it comes to casting and counting ballots, but just coming back upstream from the very first point of registration and then making sure you get to the poll on time and at the polling place experience, is not so awful that you don't want to go back.
Got you. Ben, go for it. And
yeah, and I think Chris made a really interesting point about sort of this dynamic between the influence of money in politics and engagement. So it is absolutely the case that the reason increasingly I think that people are disengaged from politics is because of the sense of overwhelming influence of money. But it's also the case that the reason money is disproportionately influential is because people aren't engaged, right? So if it were already the case that people paid attention to who their candidates were and whether they might want to vote for them, then attack ads would actually be less influential. If they actually talked to friends with deep understanding of the electoral process and about candidates, then the influence of attack ads would be diminished, and therefore there'd be less of an incentive to raise the kind of money or use those sorts of tactics. And they might use, like Chris mentioned, more interesting tactics that are actually engaging, leveraging the capital that's given to campaigns for peer-to-peer organizing at a local level. And I think that will happen, but what's interesting is it's not just that we can say, look, money in politics is toxic and problematic, and to Chris's point as well, therefore creates a narrative in which people ironically become less interested because they feel like money in politics has influence, and therefore increase the influence of money in politics. And so I do think there's an opportunity here to step back and say, well, if we can actually use new social and mobile technology to make peer-to-peer communications far more effective, it's both going to be the case. That will happen more organically, therefore reducing the influence of money in politics, and the money in politics can be more effectively deployed, augmenting those strategies of actually peer-to-peer conversations and mobilization. So I do think that we can't just say, well, money exists, it's problematic, it's going to diminish participation. We need to fight to find the kind of engagement strategies that both diminish the influence of money and that can be invested in with additional money.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point. If I may speak. So I think there's a few things here. One is the fact that you have to spend a lot of money to get independents to vote, because the very partisan and already the people who are most engaged are typically the most partisan people, and so the polarization of politics that you've seen is largely because the people who are going to get out and get to the votes, especially in an off-cycle year, are the most ideologically driven, the ones who are donating the most money, and so both parties speak to those extremes rather than to sort of the broader middle of the country that really should be leading in these areas. So I think making it easier to vote helps there, right? In other words, it doesn't have to be such a big hassle. I mean, I vote entirely by mail. That's a very easy thing to do. I think we should promote that more because it's a simple technology. It works very well. I think Oregon now, everybody can do that by default. Very convenient. Spend some time at home and figure it out. It's old school, but it works. The other thing I would say is that just in terms of the sort of perception that money in politics is such a problem that it makes people turn off to the voting experience entirely. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, I think if you look at the numbers, it's something like 80 to 85 to 90% of Americans from both parties, very small difference between the parties, think that money in politics is a huge problem. If you ask them about campaign finance reform and whether that's important, it's more like 35%. And so Larry Lessig has said articulately that that gap is the real issue. And so in terms of money in politics, we don't have to convince people that mice are a problem. We have to convince them that there's a better mousetrap out there. And I think that's what CounterPAC's trying to do. But I agree with everyone else that to the extent that you can make voting more convenient, more social, more fun, better informed, etc., then you reduce the sort of massive amounts of money that are currently being used to try to bludgeon, disaffected independent voters into actually showing up and voting.
Great, Joe, jump in.
Yeah, there's 2 points I'd make that have to do with the way money affects engagement. There's a reason. I mean, as somebody who's managed a lot of campaigns, been through a bunch of Senate, presidential, and governor's races, there's a reason these guys spend the money on negative ads. It's not to persuade people. It's not to move people over. It's to stop the other guy's people from wanting to vote, right? Why would you want to vote for a crook? Why would you want to vote for a guy who's going to take your Medicare away? It's not about going out and voting to save your Medicare. It's to disengage those Republicans or those Democrats that are attached to your opponent, and you nuke the living daylights out of him, not to do anything really except disrupt his turnout, to make it less likely that anybody would be energized to vote for. Well, when you have 2 parties that are doing that constantly, that's the first problem. It's the money machine geared to actually stop participation or limit participation. The second piece about this that I think is important that I think people should look at is that the managing class and the consulting class in both parties has a vested interest in the 15% or the money that they make from the buying of the TV ads and other things, and has almost no interest or even experience in using technology in a way that that builds a different kind of campaign. So that in a lot of ways, one of the things I think is there's a delay. We're building, people are like change.org, different people out there, everybody on this panel building different new ways to do things better, but you've got a management class and a consultant class wed to the old ways. They're monetized by the old ways. They don't understand the new ways, and we're actually kind of waiting for the kids who were in the Dean campaign and the kids that were in the Obama campaign and the Rand Paul campaign to actually get to a place of power in these campaigns, to actually say, no, we're not going to do that old way anymore, there's a better way to do it. There's better tools, and we're going to start building an effort to actually get people engaged instead of using the bludgeon of television to disengage them, which is really what the whole trick is in every presidential or governor's race or Senate race out there. Very few are doing anything different than just that.
Awesome. Josh, hopefully you're in that crew. Basically, tell us what you're thinking in this space.
Well, I just want to touch on a quick point Ben made in terms of the power of person-to-person contact, because that really is the most effective way to get someone to go out and vote or vote for a specific candidate. Now, the issue with that, and this is really what the 2004 Bush GOTV effort was made off of, that now so many other technologies and efforts are based on, including President Obama's from both 2008 and 2012, is how do you act? It's not a scalable. So people end up spending money on TV because it's a lot easier to reach a lot more people by going directly through TV. Although I guarantee you, if you gave any campaign manager the choice, maybe to Joe's point, who wasn't getting 15 points on it, but do you want to have the person-to-person contact, or do you want to have talk to someone with a TV ad? They'll say that person-to-person contact. That's why your neighbor telling you something is going to be more effective than seeing it on TV, hearing it on the radio, getting a piece of mail, etc. Now, what's great in terms of the area of technology that we're moving into, and as technology evolves, it makes it a lot easier to do that person-to-person contact in a lot of different ways. It's not just they knock on the door anymore. There are ways where you can do things through your mobile phone, and you can have people talk to one another and do that persuasion type GOTV effort. So I think as we get into more technology and as things start to evolve, there's a lot of really interesting technologies and capabilities that are going to start moving forward. I think you're going to see that a little bit in 2014. I think you're going to see that a ton in 2016, starting frankly next month when it's off to the races there.
Yeah, I think these are great points. I'm going to jump in as well. I think I want to build on that, and actually also something that Joe had said, the second point of his, which I think was quite important, which is effectively we have a structural incentive, at least in the way in which campaigns and campaign operators work, to invest a huge amount of money in more or less the same types of things we've done in the past, but just make them better through optimization, ads, and sort of mobilization. And I think what's challenging is, even though we have a huge amount of money funneled into politics, it's mostly funneled into sort of the lowest sort of barrier, easy things to do for any given campaign. It's not investing in disruptive, democratizing tools over time. If you look over the past decade on the amount of money that's been invested in building new platforms around media, around commerce, around communications, around gaming, and this is literally billions of dollars have invested in the technology tools to enable a real democratization of those industries. We haven't actually had the same thing in politics. If you look at internet-backed startups in Silicon Valley, there's an incredibly trivial number of companies that are aiming to build technologies not just for better optimization of ad targeting, but a different way in which to engage people. And I think part of the problem there is actually, one, on the entrepreneurial side of things. There's the sense in which, and this was mentioned before, there's dirty politics and people don't want to get involved and they want to be involved in disrupting entirely different industries. And the second is business model. If you have the vicissitudes of a market every 2 years, it's very difficult to build the same kind of business in a political space as you might in social gaming or you might in commerce. And so I'd love actually I know that Nancy talks to a lot increasing of sort of political startups. I know obviously Chris is running one of them. Jim has a lot of experience in building his own outside the political space. I'd love to get a little more sense of is that changing? Are we going to be able to see new platforms that are truly sort of democratizing better engagement, more disruptive than just throwing more money in ads in a more efficient and effective way? Nancy, if you want to jump in there and maybe give the first crack of response, given how many people you talk to about this.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I was muted for a bit. Yeah, it gets to something I was hoping we could talk about a little bit, which is, it's interesting. This is sort of my second run in Washington. The first one was working on the Hill way back when in a previous life, and had an interest back then, too, in sort of the way, mostly from watching the Dean campaign, an interest in the way that technology was affecting politics. And the answer was back then it wasn't. To a great extent, there was just a huge gulf between what people were doing in the technology world and what people were doing in the political world. And that's changed. It's changed incredibly in the last couple of years. It's changed incredibly in the last year. I think there's just a lot more money being poured into these civic tech startups, venture capital firms that are starting up around political technology. And I think it's too early to know how well. The pitch all these startups make is, okay, we're bringing together people that get technology and get politics in a way that hasn't happened before, right? The best of Silicon Valley engineers now are realizing that politics is something they want to spend their time doing. So that's a big change. I think we're seeing that even sort of the federal level with the U.S. Digital Service is starting up and is attracting some big name folks or people just really skilled in sort of building technologies. But what practical effect that's going to have, I'm not entirely sure yet, and that's fun for me to keep an eye on. But the intriguing thing to me is I think at some point soon we'll be able to know what works and what doesn't, and not from a lack. We won't have evidence because of a lack of funding, if that makes any sense. There are people who have said, we have the ideas to sort of make this stuff work, but we haven't had the backing to sort of pull it off at scale. So I think we're going to see that soon, sort of people being able to, experiment and fail or experiment and succeed. So yeah, and I'd love to sort of talk about that. I think that it's sort of a sea change that's happening. Sort of technology world is starting to pay attention a lot more what's happening in politics. And the one other thing, if I can sort of hijack this a little bit, one thing that's particularly intriguing to me is a little bit where we're marrying sort of the impact of the political tools and digital tools with a sort of philosophy about politics that I think is a little bit different. So I think, like a lot of other people, I was intrigued by the Zephyr teach-out to Moo race in New York, where they're running for governor and lieutenant governor. And they sort of married, to some extent, a little bit of sort of the, knowing how to use the internet to run for office, with sort of a way of talking about the distributed power in politics that sort of meshes very well with the internet. And they didn't win, but they came a lot closer than I think a lot of people expected. So I'd love to I think we're at a point that we're going to see is does the internet work as sort of a political tool, and does the internet work as a political philosophy? So it's fun for me to watch. So.
So I'll jump in on that last point. I think that's a fascinating one. I think that there is a change in the way that people are experiencing media that's been driven by the rise of social media and people doing their own presentation of what's going on in their lives and their discussion of what they're thinking about, various ideas and, experiencing produced content, but also experiencing politics and the way that they organize and the way that they think about things. And so I think we're at the early stage of this shift. And the existence of an identity layer for sharing through Facebook and Twitter and Google+, we should say on this platform too, is very, very powerful change in terms of the way that people are spending their time and their attention in all of these circles. So I think that that's an incredibly important sea change that's happening right now, and I think it does and will eventually reflect a different type of politics. And Tim and Zephyr have tried to get that started, and it didn't work this time. But I think that there's a lot of movements that are going to be driven by that technology more effectively. And we look at a lot of the overseas movements and the change that's been driven by technology, but I don't think we've seen enough of it yet here in the United States, but I expect that we will.
Yeah.
Chris, could I just add one thing, or ask you one thing, though? Given the earlier point that Ben was making, this investment opportunities and this idea of money shifting in the Valley towards political startups and things that are essentially getting away from gaming and all, it'd be good to get you and Jim's perspective, given that you're in that space. Do you see that?
So I think there is a great understanding that for some of the other things that are radically democratizing access to other goods like temporary lodging through Airbnb, like transportation through Uber, and there's ways in which politics affects that in a big way. So you're seeing more organizing around the changing of the rules to promote these sharing of ideas, and that's, I think, driving some of the thought and investment about political technologies and how you organize effectively to present a different point of view that is often challenging incumbent industries. I also do want to emphasize Joe's point from earlier that a lot of the problem with suffusing this technology through the political infrastructure is that a lot of the compensation for consultants and other folks who've done this traditionally is based on taking 10 or 15% off a media buy, and if it's a big television media buy of $1 million, spending a lot on field is something that folks aren't do. If it's easy to make the 10 or 15% on the $1 million media buy, a lot of consultants are going to guide people in that direction, and I'm really glad that Joe's brought that to the fore too.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think I'd like to go back a little bit to the sort of the investment and the way that technology could sort of disrupt the space and sort of the lack of investment. I think one thing is in politics, campaigns are the startups and candidates are the companies in a sense, and that I think it would be very interesting for the tech industry to get behind candidates, probably initially at a local or state level, who are trying to reach their constituents in totally new ways. So you can imagine things like, hey, what if there was a sort of direct democracy app, and I could say, okay, well, my elected official should, when voting on environmental issues, I delegate my vote to the Sierra Club. On education issues, I delegate my vote to my kid's teacher because she really knows this stuff. And some things I might want to jump in and vote myself. And so, a candidate, an elected official could look at that every day and say, okay, how are my voters feeling? And you can imagine an extreme version of that becomes sort of sneaking in direct democracy because people will vote for the candidates who give them the best tools to be direct. I think at some level, like a startup can make that stuff, but what you really need is a candidate that both inspires people and inspires them to sort of speak their voice on a daily basis and not have to sort of rely on a lobbyist and sort of a consultant class to tell them what their constituents think. I also think I think, but marrying that, I mean, imagining a Zephyr teach-out like candidate or somebody like that who sort of brings a kind of a populism and a dynamism, but is also willing to sort of actually try some interesting technological experiments in the way that she or he governs would be really interesting. And I think there's people in the tech industry who could facilitate that, both from sort of financing, helping somebody get elected, but also from the tools and technology aspect. And I think expecting a company to just kind of make this out of thin air, I think it's kind of, you got to have a candidate and technology that go together hand in hand.
Joe, you were there at the start of Zephyr, so tell us a little bit about what you think of that phenom.
Well, first of all, I think the one thing that's clear to me is that in politics, the innovators are the insurgents. I mean, it's no one who's in the establishment or in power in either party is actually all that motivated to mess with the game. It's all worked for them the way they did. Clintons were a great example of this in 2008. The Dean campaign, we did all that experimentation and did all the things we did primarily. Yeah, I wanted to try them, but we had to have a candidate in the campaign so desperate that there was no other way to get there from here. And so we, innovated like crazy. Even the Obama campaign in 2008 was against this establishment force. Had to go to there. No establishment money in the party was going to be there for them. They took the Dean model, perfected it, did much better things than we did with it. The technology had moved forward, and so it is a candidate like Zephyr Teach-Out who is up there against Andrew Cuomo. He has all the power structure, all the established ways working for him. He's not going to try to innovate or change anything. She and the people around her, by necessity and because of the person she is, but that's a big part of it. But it's all these changes are going to be adopted in a campaign because of an insurgency against the established way, and that I think is a key to understand that in 2016 or 2020, the next really massive advance in a campaign is probably going to come from somebody who's not in power. It's not likely to come, even if you look at the Obama 2012 campaign. They were in power. They knew how to use technology. And what did they start to do with it? How do we use the data? to get to. I mean, it was all of a sudden it was a lot different than their 2008 insurgency against the Clintons. It became, how do we use this to hold on to power? And so I think moving forward, I'd be looking to partner technology with insurgencies that matter. But I think that's where we're going to see the biggest leaps forward in terms of getting people to participate and use the technology to get more people involved and to change the politics.
Awesome point. Greg, you want to jump?
Yeah, Peter, just to Joe's point, it's kind of interesting, a couple different things that I'm thinking about here. Someone mentioned the whole notion of investing in these startups and their candidates. Their candidates really are their brands. And so you start thinking about brand strategy, and brand strategy today is using technology to engage those people to become brand loyal. And I think data is the currency in this model. And I think that we're going to see going forward new and interesting ways to leverage data, whether it's micro-targeting, whether it's presenting a different way of messaging or reaching an audience and holding their interest or their loyalty. I just think there's things to be learned by looking at brand strategy and how brand strategy is employed in a digital age. It's an entirely different ballgame today.
Got you. So Ben, why don't you were interested in the next cycle. Joe's already kind of alluding to it, looking ahead to 2016. When we first talked to Ben about this, we were thinking, well, let's just focus on the 2014 cycle. And you made a compelling argument of why you think the real changes are going to come in the next cycle. And why don't you want to talk a little bit about your perspective on that and set up the next part of the discussion?
Yeah, what I'd love to hear about, I think, if you look at, in general, when these innovations happen, it's because something else happened in the world that enables something new that wasn't possible before. And it was online fundraising, actually really pioneered in sort of 2004. But then really full realization 2008 and beyond. Big data wasn't really possible before 2012, and it's the same kind of scalable way. Weren't enough experts. And the biggest transformation I think we see now is mobile. That everyone has the most powerful device ever invented until basically 1990 in their pocket, with this superset of all information with connections to everyone else, and it's connected also to organizations. So I think the first person, also because he has to leave I think pretty soon, who has the most intimate experience in this is Chris. And I'd love to hear a little bit about, one, the opportunity that you've seen in mobile, and really the sort of extent to which organizations, existing institutions, have been amenable to this, or the problems of resistance so far that you've seen.
I think that there is a real interest and desire among some to jump in on this, but we've seen amazing dedication and devotion to the old ways of doing things as we've worked with campaigns, as we've demoed folks, and they've said, oh, wow, that's amazing, but we've got X vendor that we're using for data, and they're printing our paper sheets for us, and we're going to stick with that. We've done a deep sell in terms of the return on investment that you get and the number of increased doors that you can knock if you're not doing data entry. We're a real-time platform, and with the full geocoding, we use Google App Engine in the background. Very, very powerful technology and Google Maps integration to get the surveys done at the door, have the data compiled in real time, and basically when people are back from their canvas, it's all done. And the field director can run it from a Starbucks down the street or from campaign headquarters and cut turf and get it out on mobile devices and just make it as easy as it should have been from the beginning. But there are folks who are just kind of grizzled in their old ways of doing things, and they don't want to change. And that's part of what you deal with in any political endeavor, in any human endeavor. That happens in the technology industry too, but to a lesser extent. So it's been a challenge, but we've knocked on more than 2 million doors using our software so far. We think that we'll hit well over 3 million, probably over 4 million by the time the cycle's over, and that's fantastic. That's progress. But there's a long way to go from there. I'm encouraged by what I see, but the pushback that we've gotten, I guess I've seen enough over the years that I wasn't surprised by it, but we had to go in with our eyes open. So, and unfortunately, I'm just about at my time, so I'm going to have to jump off and head to the plane. But boy, this has been a fantastic discussion, and thanks to all of you. Forward to the highlights from the last half hour once they're cut by our crack reinventors crew. So please carry on and continue the fantastic discussion.
Great. Hey, Josh, thanks, Chris. Appreciate you being in. Josh, you want to comment a little bit on mobile, and then Anne, you wanted to also get the government perspective as well on this next cycle coming up. Josh?
Hey, I just had a little bit of a bandwidth issue. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
What I was thinking about these disparate data streams that are no longer siloed, so they're now working with each other, and you can now show these correlations and causality into easily digestible data to make decisions. And now from a mobile perspective, you can really target individuals, and how do you do that to turn people out, et cetera. I think it opens up a really interesting technology for the 2016 cycle, and whoever takes advantage of that is going to have a really interesting head start. And so does that happen on the grassroots level, or does that happen on sort of those larger committee type levels? And I think that's something that's going to be really exciting to see as we move forward and how people really start harnessing that technology.
The 2016. Okay, so we're moving into the 2016 cycle here. Anne, you're going to be the new chair of the FEC. You'll be overseeing that world in the next cycle. Anything that's interesting in the government perspective, looking ahead in the next couple of years here?
Well, so far, what we've seen at the FEC, and of course, what we oversee is essentially campaign financing and disclosure. So, and when people come before us with their new ideas, it's usually to figure out how they fit into our scheme. And generally, though, what we still see are the same ads, the same issues, the same fundraising kinds of behaviors, transmuted to cell phones, or but they still want to do running ads to raise money rather than making a major shift in how campaigns are run. But I do want to make a point about that, because I think, and maybe I'm a lot more positive about the potential impact of tech in totally changing the way campaigns are being done. But it seems to me that all of the rules that we now have at the FEC regarding campaigns, and I think this is true in most states as well, are going to have to change. I mean, the whole system that now exists about campaign finance, I think, will be outmoded, and so we do need to think forward about how the technologies, and I haven't heard enough about how we're going to have alternate ways of having support for campaigns from you all, and I'd like to hear it. But I actually think that's really important, and from my perspective as chair, I mean, one of the things that I want to do is hear from the tech industry, and maybe even get an advisory group to talk to us about how we should make changes and how we can respond to them in a rapid way.
That sounds awesome. I mean, Greg, actually, you who have 30 years, I think, in the tech industry, as well as something that's really focused on civic, public, voting technologies. Well, what do you think about the next couple of years, the promising of shifting the train a little bit in that space?
Well, we're seeing, again, I'm going to keep going back to the data play. It's probably sounding like a broken record here, but one of the things that's happening in our work is this ability to set data free, making election data open data. We think that some of the projects we're working on here are going to provide new levels of information that haven't been before available, and things like participation and performance data. We think that once you get that data out there, and turn data journalists and data scientists and every other activist onto that, we can't imagine there's going to be a spectrum of new information that's going to come forth. We're already doing some things today in the whole elections data results reporting area with the Knight Foundation that's allowing us to sort of begin to understand, for example, the performance of ballots and whether ballots are unwittingly disenfranchising certain classes of voters because of visual acuity problems, for example. Information that 3, 4, 5 years ago we didn't have access to. I can only imagine that when that data becomes more widely available, how that will affect electioneering and how that will affect campaigns and how that will actually affect the performance of government.
Awesome. Joe, it sounds like you want to jump in. Go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on Ann's point, just from being, again, somebody who's been through too many of these presidential campaign cycles. No one should be allowed to have gone through as many as I have, or should be put in an asylum or something. But in the Dean campaign, just to give you an example, the FEC is really, her point is exactly right. I mean, the laws, not just the FEC regulations laws, but the state laws are so obsolete and have been made obsolete by the technology and the leaps that have happened since just even 2004. And the one that I always get the biggest laugh out of is that in 2004, and this one's been fixed, but in 2004, the FEC regs were that you had to report on paper your contributions. And so that was written for that law, or that regulation was a great in a world where a few thousand people a quarter gave $2,500, gave the maximum to the candidate. It never envisioned 159,000 people in 1 week, and zillions of them on the last day of the quarter, giving that money. We used to have to people may not remember, but we used to literally have to have a trolley cart with stacks and stacks and reams of the FEC report that we'd always make a great TV PR move out of having to roll it into FEC headquarters. That one's was fixed, but there's still a ton of things that just really hinder the ability for a campaign to unanswered questions. I mean, it's just a bunch of obsolete regs that really need an advisory panel like she's talking about really has to be there to help. It always struck me as weird that the FEC never asked us, people in the Dean campaign, hey, what would you do? Or what were the problems? Because no one ever did. To this day, no one's ever asked us that question. So I really appreciate Ann bringing that up.
Well, Ann, you got volunteers right here. You could probably get a show of hands right here that people would get in there.
I do, and if I could add one thing, not only do I want all of you to volunteer, and I want to connect with you all on this, but I just wanted to mention that we're putting on a symposium. I hope you don't mind if I advertise the symposium in February 19th and February 20th. The 19th in San Francisco at Hastings, and the 20th will be roundtable discussions at Stanford. And I want the tech industry and people like the people at the Dean campaign, that would be you, and others to come and talk about tech industry. And the FCC, by the way, is joining. And so would very much like to get information from you all and participation as well. So I'll be in touch.
We're happy to help facilitate that at Reinventors. And also, I just will say that basically the partners in this series, T4A, techforamerica.org, they're awesome, and they're all about getting the tech communities, particularly on the West Coast here, connected into government and move the knowledge of the tech industry into civic and public platforms. Absolutely. So plenty of fruitful ways there. Just looking ahead, though, because I know we're trying. Oh, Ben, you want to reset that thing here? But I would say let's look ahead here, and where are we going to see the big changes coming? And I'd love to hear from Nancy too. But Ben, go for it.
No, I just wanted to very briefly interject and call out how notable it is that the future chair of the FEC literally said two things which were remarkable. And one is all the rules we have are going to have to change, and the second is money in politics is a problem, and I'd be happily out of a job. It's just an incredible thing to say. Remarkable. Thank you for that, and for the openness and embracing of that transformation, bringing in people from all different stripes, talking about what we can do to change. But it's just outstanding and a fresh of breath air to see you say that.
Here, here. I'm there with you. Nancy, you were going to just jump in, looking ahead here, what you're seeing, and then we've got a few more minutes. I mean, we're kind of moving into the last sections here of looking ahead. Given that everyone put how the presidentials are going to be a lot of disruptions, where would you start pointing and looking, and what are you kind of hearing out there in the trail or in the reporting field as kind of where to start looking for next? What to be looking for?
I actually think in Washington, which is sort of amazing, I think, you know, somebody like Anne being here and saying the things that Ben just pointed out that she's saying, that's I think would be surprising to a lot of people in the public. And one of the amazing things I think about covering sort of national politics is that very often it's just a very few people with a new idea, right? You know, one person on the inside who's sort of willing to try something new, sort of circling up some allies on the outside who are willing to lend support, and a lot of change can happen. And I think we're seeing people in the agencies and FEC, which, you know, traditionally has a reputation of not being sort of all that forward-looking and innovative. At the FCC, you have a few commissioners that are starting to make noise about, you know, how we can use technology to do things better. And I think, you know, one of the things that one of the strongest feelings I have now in sort of surveying the field is there are just more of those people now in positions of power doing the work day to day than there were in the past. So I think, you know, it's sort of fascinating to study. I mean, there are agencies in DC that are just enormously consequential, and we don't pay a lot of attention to what they do. But there are people, you know, when you peel back the curtain, there tends to be people working very hard to figure it out. And I think one of the reasons that people are so, you know, we saw with healthcare.gov, people were so worked up about sort of the real process-focused things there, because that was stymieing the work of people who had some good ideas, right? So what are the obstacles that are there, and people are starting to study them and try to chip away at them. So I think that's, you know, I'm sort of always looking for those people that are sort of, you know, have the ideas and willing to work at executing upon them. And again, I would just reiterate, I think there are just more of those people now than there might have been in the past.
Totally right. It's actually quite interesting how it's filtered in through the whole federal government. There's this layer of techies that are now really changing the game. I'm seeing the same thing from my perspective. It's awesome. Joe, you're going to give you mentioned the role of insurgents. Looking ahead, I don't know, where do you see some openings of interesting change points here coming ahead? And love to hear from other people too.
Well, look, I really do believe that whether it's 2016 or 2020, there's going to be a successful independent run for president because the tool sets are there now for people of all stripes to come together and tell both these parties that they want to change things. And I think that I believe the next real big innovation will be the insurgent. I doubt it's going to come from the Clinton campaign if she goes. It's a real question mark for me whether the Republicans can lead an insurgent kind of development of new, the next big step. I'm looking for it to come from an insurgent that comes out of neither party. It takes them both on, sort of like Orman's doing in Kansas right now. Because this technology makes a Ross Perot kind of candidacy. I don't mean the guy that went crazy and all that other stuff, but talking about his independent candidacy. Had it existed in that 1992 candidate had existed in today's world with the tools available, just these tools probably would have wiped out both parties that year, and I think it's coming.
Awesome. Ben, I think I'll be interested to keep an eye on it, but you're not going to name exact names of independents who might actually do that, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ben.
No, go for it, Jeff.
No, I just think it's probably not somebody we know right now. Is what I'm saying. No one had heard of was thinking about Howard Dean at this point. And so I think it'll be somebody that a teach out kind of. So, I mean, not talking about her, but I'm talking about some candidacy that just sort of materializes and gets the kind of following and has people signing up and moving things. But it'd probably be an independent. I'm sorry, Ben. Go ahead.
Not at all. I think I want to pull back a point actually Jim had mentioned as well, a little bit on this radically disruptive thing around direct democracy. I think that unequivocally, and it may not be for president, it may start in Congress, but there will be a candidate for Congress in the next 2 or 4 years who will commit to voting for legislation in accordance with the online votes of their constituents. And they will probably lose, but they will get lots of press, and there will be somebody in the next election cycle that will do the same thing in a more sophisticated way, using things like proxy voting, not let everyone wants to vote directly on legislation, but giving a vote over to a trusted source and authority. And I do think if you look at even stepping very far back, look in the next 30 years, and the way in which we run campaigns today. I mean, the rationale for the way in which we run campaigns, but also we govern, is a situation in which limited information, limited expertise, limited communication 250 years ago. We live in a very different age with rapid communication, real-time expertise that you can crowdsource, and the ability for people to project their influence at any given time. And that transformation, I think people underappreciate the extent to which that opens up opportunities, even within our current system, with new tools for very disruptive insurgents that are not just taking a slightly different approach, but a fairly radical different approach to politics. And again, it doesn't mean they're going to win right away, but I think that the mere possibility of having that emergence, the new tools they'll build, the change in narrative, the energy and excitement they'll be able to mobilize, I think will open up new opportunities in the same way that we've seen just truly radical disruption in lots of industries. I mean, commerce right now, I mean, peer-to-peer commerce is hugely transformational for people's lives and for what people buy and from whom they buy. And we're going to see the same kinds of massive transformations, I think, in politics in ways that far exceed optimizations on ad targeting, personalization. And that's some of the stuff I'm really excited about. And we'll see if we get some early inklings of that in 2016, even if it doesn't win.
Interesting. Jim, what do you think is going to be happening in this nascent money in politics front in the next cycle?
Well, I mean, what we're trying to do is create some hope and to create, throw some new ideas out there, and hopefully we will get some wins and have at least a couple of campaigns run a little bit better than they would have otherwise. I think there's other efforts where people are trying to say, look, we've done amazing things, we've built amazing stuff. I mean, there's so many things that are outrageous about this. The point I make to people is, imagine if, I think you guys have probably heard the stat that, incoming freshman House members in the Democratic Party were given a PowerPoint on how they should spend their time, and it basically added up to 55% plus was raising money. Imagine you're a Google engineer and your first day at work, they say, okay, I know you want to code, but first spend 4 hours of your morning dialing VCs so that Google can raise some investment dollars. I mean, I think there needs to be a sort of sense of outrage and a sense of hope, coupled together. And so, I think that's the big picture thing that I'd like to get to. Money's one part of it, but I think this direct democracy thing and proxy voting is very interesting. I think there's a number of ways that if the people who are here today and others behind them can actually say let's bring the sort of same sense of optimism and fearlessness and innovation to changing the way that we govern that we have to building social games and all whatever nonsense I spent my career doing. Hopefully we can actually get people excited about this again, and I think a lot of it will happen at a local level, but that's okay.
Josh, some thoughts on what's next?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I'm really excited about seeing is how the information flow continues. I mean, there are essentially millions of data points, millions of conversations that are constantly happening every second of every day. How do you distill that down into something where, one, candidates can hear what their constituents are saying, and two, voters, constituents really are the things that we're working on here, which is how do you distill that down into very actionable insights so you can instantly see, okay, this is what's accelerating, this is what people care about. And I think that's going to be a really big piece of what we see going forward, how people harness that, how people take advantage of that. And to what everyone's saying here, that can go in a number of different directions. Does that go into more of a direct democracy type path, or does it continue down the path that politics has been looking at for the past few cycles, or maybe even since the beginning? And so I think 2016 will be very transformational in terms of how that looks.
Awesome. Let's hope that's true. Greg, some thought on what's ahead?
Sure. I don't know. It's part of me. I don't want to toss a wet blanket on it, but I think I'm going to play a little devil's advocate here and suggest that technology has really only impacted how candidates can market themselves and really attack each other. I mean, that's what I've heard today, and it really is just creating more noise. This direct democracy thing, very intriguing. The whole notion of when will today's commercial internet actually be able to sustain a more direct democracy with voting. Internet voting is a topic that's a third rail, especially in the work that we do with elections officials and stakeholders. But to be sure, there's research and development going in to ask how do we simultaneously handle the problems of security and privacy. But from my point of view, having been in the tech sector since Ronald Reagan first began his first term as president, the real technological advances that I've seen in the tech sector have not really permeated politics or the way government is tasked to operate. I mean, frankly, they're still being executed much the same way they were decades ago. I mean, for one thing, if you think about it, citizens today communicate with government using 21st century technology. Meanwhile, government is communicating with its citizens using 20th century technology and 19th century processes. I mean, to that point, voting and elections administration are a great example of the snail-like pace of technology and politics and the political processes of our democracy. I would love to think that by 2016 there's going to be some great breakthrough, and I don't mean to toss a wet blanket here, but I think from our experience 7 years into our project, change, even if you mask it with the clever word innovation, still has a great deal of resistance. And I think we have a challenge to figure out how to lower the barriers to adoption by making it more friction-free.
Interesting.
Anyone have jump in real quickly on that comment about sort of you end up having constituents using 21st century technology communicating with a government that uses sort of 20th century technology. We find, we're in the business of, building the biggest platform in the internet using petitions, mobilizing 75 million people, soon to be 100 million people. And what's interesting is historically, of course, these have gotten lots of traction in the past, but frankly, especially at the congressional level, they're not taken with the kind of seriousness that you would expect if 5,000 constituents walked up to the office of a member of Congress. Now, there have been reasons for this historically. There have been questions about the authenticity of signatures and whether they really care about the issue as much as they might if they came up to the office. But I think what's interesting we're seeing now is increasingly we're engaging now, we're working with members of Congress, Paul Ryan, Elizabeth Warren, and others, are starting to say, look, these are actual constituents, and we're creating channels on Change.org for each of these different elected officials and enabling them to directly respond openly and transparently to their own constituents on the specific issues they're being petitioned on, and then constituents can respond to those responses. So it's not sort of this asymmetric one way, I'm going to give you a single response and that's it, but instead it's the capacity to mobilize further, and the entire power of politics is organizing, is your ability to actually do something subsequent to your initial action. And so I think what's interesting is the reason elected officials are doing this isn't because it's cool. It's because when you have a world in which 20%, 30%, soon 50% of your likely voters are on a platform asking you about issues in between elections, which we'll have in the next couple of years, you actually shift incentives. Because ultimately, votes matter more than dollars, and dollars only matter insofar as they help you get votes. If there are other channels like this that actually enable citizens to interact with elected officials between elections, and then at the time of elections, those citizens see how their elected officials responded between elections, I think you do have a very interesting dynamic. So I do think on the insurgent side of things, it won't be technology the government creates that allows citizens to communicate with them. It'll be outside technology that exists that gets massive traction, that changes the incentives of elected officials who, by virtue of simply wanting to communicate at scale with constituents, will need to adopt those tools. And I think that's really exciting.
That's awesome. Well, Ben, you've jumped the gun here a little bit because we're just now heading into the final round here. Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our 90-minute session. And we do want to go around with everybody kind of giving a last word, and we'll end with you, Ben. But you've kind of entered, basically there's been a lot of interesting, hopeful signs here about what's to come, or what's happening and what's to come. There's been also some kind of, thoughtful feelings of how resistant the system is to change. And so I don't know, as we go around everyone gets the kind of last word, what gives you hope from this conversation maybe would be one way to think about it, and what you would really like to see happen in the next couple of years here in this technology space. And I think it's just a way of kind of summing up your final word for the roundtable. So why don't we go around, Joe, why don't you basically tee up your final thoughts here, and you can take the time you need to kind of lay out your final thoughts, and let's go around the table.
Look, I'm very optimistic that the technology is going to empower people to make real change in democracy, improve it. I so I don't mean to be the negative person. I just do think I've been through it. I've been crushed by the system. I've seen how tough it is to defeat it, and I just think don't take your eyes off the established ways and their ability to keep things the way, to hold everything back. But it's inevitable that massive change in the positive way is going to happen because of what's developing. The most interesting thing in the roundtable, though, to me, the interesting idea was Ben's idea of a candidate prediction that a candidate in the next cycle might go out and pledge that he'll vote the way the district tells him to, and it's such a good idea. I'm going to steal it. Or it's possible that Orman, if I were Orman in Kansas right now, that's what I would do on the leadership question. Every time I get asked it, I'm going to let the people of Kansas tell me which leader of the Senate they want me to vote for. I'm going to have a system set up to do that. I'm going to follow what the people tell me. It'd be a great way out of the mess the one problem question he asked. So I thought that was brilliant.
Awesome. We're always into brilliant ideas coming up through here. Jim, do you want to say your final thoughts? Thanks, Joe. Yeah, well, you know what they say in Silicon Valley, it's ideas are useless, it's all about execution. So what we need is somebody who can get a person like that elected, and we need the candidate themselves. So I think building a technology is not really that hard. I'm sure there's lots of people on this call who could help with that. But yeah, I think that's potentially a really exciting idea. I mean, I think we're looking for sort of big thing. I mean, I think there's a general sense like, wow, I mean, so many things are getting better about people's lives, but their interactions with the public sector are lagging behind. I mean, think how much better your phone has gotten. Think how much easier it is to read a book. Think about all these ways that that people's lives and health and is getting better. I say that being in this sort of privileged position in the technology industry, my friends aren't starving for jobs, but there is a sense of, I think, kind of optimism right now about what we can build in this country, and then at the same time, when you look at public schools or highways or the transportation system in San Francisco or housing or all these other areas where where the public sector is significantly involved, it's fallen way behind. And I think I'm hopeful that people will not sort of turn away from that and just sort of resign themselves to this kind of like very bifurcated outcomes in the world, but instead dedicate themselves to to bringing what they've seen happen in the technology and in the private sector and bringing that to the broader public. And I think it's not just how do you get 2% better click through on your political ads. It's got to be kind of bigger, bolder ideas. And I'm very encouraged to hear people here and the future chair of the FEC thinking along similar lines. And I hope that I've spent 25 years in the video game industry. Video games are going to be just fine without me. I'd love to spend the next 25 years working on these kinds of problems. And I think there's other people out there like that too. Awesome. Good to hear that. Anne.
Thank you. This has been really interesting, and I would say that for me, I really do believe that tech will improve democracy. And what is nice, I'm actually from Silicon Valley and have lived there since high school, and so I've seen the changes, and I think it's actually nice to see the tech industry and those of you who are sort of representative of it here that care about these issues of democracy, because that's something that hasn't happened before, honestly. And so I think it's wonderful to see it. And I just do want to put in a couple words about government, because I've been in all three levels of government in my career, and I think that you have to remember that we could have a whole other Google roundtable about government financing and all the problems of lack of support for government over the last 30 years that have resulted in some of what exists now and some of the reticence to change. So I think as a partnership, most people, I think, will respond to it, and that's what is so nice to hear what everybody here is talking about. Yeah, there are people, and certainly the federal government and the FEC is quite stultified, but there is change afoot, I believe.
Great to hear that, and so great to have you participating here and engaged in this community. Josh, last word?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really optimistic in terms of how technology is about to, and currently is, really going to start framing politics and how campaigns operate, as well as government. I mean, we're at a place right now where there's huge amounts of information. It's a matter of not only, one, organizing that information, but it really gives an opportunity, I think, for constituents and for voters to really make their voice heard. Now it's a matter of how those in elected office and are running for office are listening to them and then taking action off of that. But more than ever, there is the ability and the outlet for voters and constituents to talk to their leaders. So I think from a good government perspective and in terms of how campaigns operate, going forward, tremendous opportunity. So it'll be an exciting cycle, both how we finish up this one over the next month, and then unfortunately I think we'll probably wait about 2 days, and then 2016 will spin up, and so we'll see how that works too.
Definitely. Nancy?
So final thoughts. I think in my experience, these things tend to move very slowly and then very quickly. So we had, there wasn't a lot of sort of progress on the front. Then the Dean campaign happened. There wasn't a lot of progress. The Obama campaign happened. There wasn't a lot of progress on the legislative front. Then the SOPA and PIPA fight happened. So I think if people are looking to be optimistic, it's sort of biding your time in some ways. The people are doing the groundwork on the back end, and then they'll be capitalized on, whether it's the next presidential race, the next legislative fight. But I think things are happening that aren't always that apparent until they are. So I think that's just a perspective to keep in mind as we sort of, I'm as cynical as the next person, but waiting for things to sort of happen, I think they can sneak up on us.
Awesome. Greg?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. We like to think of what we're working on here as critical democracy infrastructure, and I think all of us have been talking about what I would call critical democracy infrastructure, and I think that the strategy for all of us ought to be delivery. Things that people can see, touch, and try. You can spend lots of time talking about what can be done, what might be done, but thinking about some of Jim's comments a minute ago, I think we just need to get in and keep moving. We have a millennial generation that in 10, 15 years will be running the state houses, and I am pretty darn certain that they're going to have a 140-character way of expressing things, and they're going to have a completely different idea of how we govern and how technology plays the role it does in politics, campaigns, and elections. And I think it's an exciting opportunity for us to be there.
Awesome. Ben, last word.
Yeah, this has been outstanding. I think that the narrative we've heard on this call is largely similar to the narrative we've heard in the media, which is sort of the intersection of both these contradictory beliefs. One is this disillusionment of politics, this frustration of the excessive money in the way in which we run our governance, and that it undermines people's participation. And there's this other narrative, which is the incredible capacity of technology to massively disrupt, dramatically engage, and to transform industries. And they're both right. And the question is, what's going to win out in the end? If you look out in 10 years, which of those trends will be more historic? And what's interesting, if you look at other industries, there's a very common thing, the hype cycle is talked about, where you have a technology trigger, and there's this huge peak of expectations that's highly inflated right away. Technology is going to change democracy, and then there's this massive realization that it doesn't do it right away. There's this trough of disillusionment, and people dismiss it and think it's not going to change anything. And then there's this sort of slope of enlightenment. And it ends up being the case that the transformation that you once expected of the technology ends up being realized. It just takes a lot longer than you expect. And you see this in a lot of different technologies, and sometimes faster than you expect at the very end, like around smartphones. Phones were kind of dumb and pretty boring until all of a sudden a massive transformation of the iPhone. And I think we're going to have something quite similar. I think there's going to be something very disruptive and exciting that increasingly starts to happen in the next, maybe not, certainly not this next election cycle, maybe not 2 years, but 4 and 6 years. And I do think it will not happen from a traditional candidate. It'll come from, as Joe Trippi said, from an insurgent. I think it's especially exciting to see people that we don't expect whatsoever, that will end up using something fundamentally different, and they themselves may not win, but they'll change, I think, the game in a significant way. And I do think that in the long term, people who bet on technology and technology optimists have almost always been right. And I think they'll be right in this case. And the question is, how long will it take?
Awesome. Couldn't wrap it any better. So, Ben, thanks for that. Thanks to the whole group. We went a little bit over, but it was such an awesome conversation. We'll edit this thing up. We'll have it all packaged up within the next few days. And thanks for everyone for watching, and thanks for all of you for coming together. It was really, really a fantastic group. And we'll stay connected. We'll connect you all to him. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jay and Robert, and Matt, and Catherine, Roundtable.